Hey guys, Mustached Tom here to review The Watchers. Now, I'm a little bit late on this one, but I'm here nonetheless, so let's dive into it. And just a few things I did not pick up immediately. I wasn't aware that this was produced by M. Night, as you can clearly see on the poster. Uh, Debut of his daughter, Ashana Shyamalan, and features Dakota Fanning, an actress that has been around the block, as it were. Anyway, getting to the movie itself, we follow this narration about this guy running through the woods. And he seems to be running past these post signs as he's looking for his wife. The signs seem to indicate that he's looped around, but that isn't quite what's happening here. He climbs up a tree, and the tree, he climbed up a lot further than he thought he was. And he falls down, and he eventually gets dragged in by an unknown force into this pretty sizable pit. We then cut to a parrot that begins mimicry, which, considering what this whole movie is about, is quite fitting, I suppose. Perhaps a little bit too on the nose about mimicry and how it works. As the bird begins to mimic, try not dying or something along those lines, we see our main character, Mina, go to bar in the early scene and kind of, put on a flirt with some fake brown hair, talking to some guy named Colin. But then she begins to go on a drive while talking about to her parrot, sort of narrating to us through him or her, not sure, whatever, the bird, about how 15 years ago, how it has been since an event has occurred with her mom passing away. So, she ends up deep in the woods and reaching one of these signs, and this one reads, "Point of no return at 12. After checking out her trunk and seeing the smoke rise from it, she calls out in the woods, "Hello," as one of those annoyances in horror films, is that gimmick. But when she turns back, she sees that her car is gone in the direction that she came from. So, she places the bird down and names the bird Darwin, because I guess it didn't have a name beforehand. Soon after, a flock of birds flies by, and we see another person running by. And then I don't know if it's the same person or another one, but it's an older woman we see. She warns her to get inside, and so she does. She's with two others who are there, and this older woman named Madeline introduces this location called the Coop, and our two other characters, Sierra, this this other woman there, and Daniel, this guy. And the older woman, Madeline, begins to explain that these watchers are like creatures. And as they look into this one-way mirror that reflects them, but from the outside, I guess, just looks at them, and they hear some noise, and applause, as it were. And we see, I don't know what the idea or concept behind this is. Maybe it's another gimmick of the bigger picture thing, but the wall itself seems to have the wall, the mirror, has the ability to change itself. And perhaps that is another, again, direct hint as to what is going on here. So her name, one of their names, I believe it was Kiara, or Clara. Here's her name get called from outside. I think this is when that happens. Or, no. Sorry. Let me just follow my notes. They, let's say blah blah blah. So, yeah, she like heads out the next day. Sorry. And she sees how vast the forest she has entered in truly is. So they return. She returns with Madeline, and they see another point of no return. This one being 44, and she kind of gives Madeline is our main character of exposition throughout this whole narrative, as she explains that past these points of no return, well, there is quote unquote no return. And also mentions that there's a professor out there somewhere. And during one of their nights of being watched, Clara begins to dance. Meanwhile, our main character, Mina, begins to watch a reality TV show that was left behind by that professor. Some dating show about something in the effect of what's going on here, but the quote-unquote better version of it. You know, the very clear personified acting, as it were. So they all head out the next day, and this time she decides to follow Clara, and she decides afterwards to investigate one of these holes that the Watchers are taking their little slumber. And she goes on about how she was the newer one among the three, being there 5 months. So, as they return, they listen to, or she listens to more of that show, and begins to touch the glass and listen on the other side for a bit, and one knocks back. So the next day, she follows Daniel, and begins to hear laughter of a little girl. And she asked about him, and he's been here for 8 months. So, you know, a little more than half a year. And begins to wander, you know, with him. So she begins to investigate one of the holes with him as an assistant, essentially. So she climbs down, finding a paper from 1992, perhaps an indication of when the first investigation into what these things were, or at least one of them were, and finds an old camera as well. She places it back, though they bring it back up somehow later. I don't know. Question mark. But also finds a bike and pulls it up. She begins to hear something and sees something as well. Seeing a voice and hand. But in return, when she gets back, she lies to Madeline about what she saw out there. So they use the camera that they somehow pull out, even though she left it there, as surveillance. And they see, in response, hear knocking at the door. And a person, Clara's husband, responds. But Madeline asks her to be, you know, smart about it and ask him a question about something that they would only know. So she refers to a book, which he does not have an answer for, and to also pick up the camera to make sure that he's the only one, but by the time he does that, he's pulled away. And so too is the bike when with Madeline pushes it away. We then get, at this point, a flashback to our main character and her twin sister. We see her copying her mom, more mimicry figures, and the mom getting annoyed and pulling up the window because her hands are still outside the window, so they get pulled on, and then the mom got distracted and they get hit by a car. And we cut back to our current timeline and begin to see her marking the trees and makes her way, back. Seeing Clara distraught and wanting no more of this, so she heads out, opening the door and leaving it open. So those two are outside now when it's getting darker. She teeters on the edge, ready to pretty much end her life. We see Daniel making a move against Madeline, being tired of the way things have been, I guess repeating in a way. But Madeline and Mina are the ones who end up stuck outside while Daniel locks them out of the bunker with the mirror in it. So we finally get a look at what these creatures are. These tall, lanky creatures. And there are many of them. Probably 100 or so, I would estimate. And once they break away, she makes their way to the door with Madeline and recounts that she feels responsible for her mother's death, as the whole flashback thing we saw, and she's let back in with Madeline in tow. We hear from Madeline that she had came here on purpose, now, wanting to hunt one of these things, and begins to further expose what these things are, and refers to the Watchers as these other creatures now, at this point, referring to other names in folklore and legend as changelings and fairies, which, if you ever played Dungeons and Dragons, you'd probably be familiar with these things a lot more. So, changelings, as an example, well, it's pretty on the nose. They can literally change form. And fairies are known as smaller creatures, typically, but they're sometimes portrayed as tricksters as well, but harmless overall is generally the fairy vibe. And these are some of the names given. And while they are in the bunker, they hear the mimicry that the creatures, the changelings or Watchers, are able to provide. And they are spot on. During this attack, they spot an underground bunker, which they were not aware of, apparently, all this time, for the several months that they were there. I press X to doubt that. I'm sorry, but if you've been in a location for, 8 months was the guy's time frame, or 9, or half a year, you would think they would be, seeing what's in the bunker, what's around the bunker, making sure everything in the bunker is like, there aren't any secrets such as that. So, yeah, the movie becomes more and more unbelievable at that point. It completely breaks, unfortunately. But anyway, they make their way down in this underground bunker and find a vault and hear the videotapes from the professor going over even more of their history, about how he came here on purpose as well, wanting to learn what these creatures were and how they function. And even captured one at some point. And they view all of this via an old computer. This clip is from 2009, so not quite 1992, but slightly later. He refers to the location in the bunker known as Wonderland, which I'm sure has some other meaning. Alice in Wonderland and all that, but whatever. I'm not sure what exactly the connection is to that in this, but here we are. So she skips forward at some point to the last clip that tells them that there is a boat at one of the postings at 134. This is like at videotape 300 or however many there were. And to follow the birds, because they will lead in that direction. So, as they prepare or set out for, getting tiring out to the two that were there prior, Clara and Daniel dance a little, and they begin to head out. So, as they're heading out the next day, she lets Darwin out to, quote-unquote, guide them, I guess. And as they make their way past the gateway, they find a seal where more exposition about how they were trapped here begins. So they see this flock of birds, and they make their way to the water. Unfortunately, one is already close by, doing in a mimicry of the guy, the husband of, for Clara, but had called forth Daniel because he was the furthest behind them. So Daniel is the one who's pulled away as the other three get in the water, on the boat in the water. Excuse me. So Daniel is transformed, is the best way I can put this, into one of them. Though it looked like a kill at first initially, at least how they were performing whatever thing they were doing. So, they're on the boat, we see them, and the movie continues when they get on the boat, which you could have probably cut there, but the movie continues because it's not quite done yet. We get past that. As they awake the next day or whatever, they get to a bridge and they see a bus and they take it. So she takes some time to herself, Mina does, and gets a more clear flashback of the actual, heading outside, seeing the death, and gets to the school where a lot of that remaining information was still left behind. And again, more information about how these fairies / changelings replicate and such. Finds some picture cue cards. Afterwards, she finds Clara. Gets to her, meaning. She warns that Madeline herself was a changeling. All along. The twist, the M. Night Shyamalan twist, persists with the daughter as well, it would seem. Is a watcher herself. And so the watcher indeed comes for them. So Clara is knocked out and is grabbed by the changeling and goes on about being this ancient one or being deformed or whatever and is being choked out. But eventually loses the grip and, she like heads outside while she, the changeling, changes into Mina. So it's Mina facing herself essentially. And Mina goes on about how she is a halfling, that meaning a changeling, half a changeling and half a person, because the lore went into how people would fall in love with these changelings at times. And that there could even be more potential halflings out there. And she goes on about how being human is so many things, the negatives and the positives alike, in her final narration to the creature, the halfling, the changeling, whatever you would want to call it, to persuade her to not, enter. So, she's persuaded by the power of just talk, literally, I think, and flies off, her wings growing back. Changelings knowing to have them at times, as the poster seems to indicate. So, we see that happen, and then we see her check up on Clara, and then we cut to some time later with her talking with her twin sister about the events that had been taking place, and about how this changeling had changed forms once again, taking the form of a little girl looking for something, looking for others, perhaps. And that is how the movie The Watchers end, continually being watched, even at the end of the movie. And I think there are a few things I would shift around this movie. Now, I don't know, apparently this is based off of a book, so there's always the adaptation argument. I don't know how much of this is pure adaptation. But things I immediately think of when I'm thinking of impersonation, right, is, The Thing. A classic horror movie, about how, they can copy the ability to mimic, and how they have these forms that are just, otherworldly, almost. And, they're being, it being so close that you can even test it. I feel like what this movie could have done is sort of be akin to, being The Thing in a way. And I think what that would mean is that I think there would need to be a few more characters. Now, this is a small cast of people. There were 4 actors here and a bird. And I feel like what would have made it a bit more compelling is that if a bit more people from the outside were dragged in from various forms of life, as, the little movies seem to so almost implement or / want. And even the Watchers themselves seem to have almost wanted in a way, but they only get 4. I feel like the movie could have been better with a bigger cast of characters and a bit more personality coming from each of them. I mean, we get very little in terms of their characteristics here. We get Clara is a dancer. We get Mina is someone who feels guilt for a past event. Daniel is I don't even know what characteristic I can pull from him. There isn't much. He seems a bit more finicky, I guess, is the most I can say about him. These characteristics aren't that deep. And I feel like either, or I feel like you would need to do both, right? I feel like first you would need to expand upon each of these four characters first and foremost, get them down packed. Who are they? Why are they here? What are their personalities, strengths, weaknesses, all the basics of writing up a basic character. From there, uh, you know, really exploit that. I would get them to the forest a little bit quicker as well, her as well, and as well, if this was, say, my director debut instead of, A Knight's Daughter, what I would have done is gotten all of these characters to this area much quicker. The beginning of the movie, as an example, has this guy running out and getting dragged. I would have cut that out of the movie completely. I think we cut that out, instead showing someone getting into the bunker, instead, like, replacing the guy getting dragged away to, well, presumably death, to a guy getting into a bunker, or someone getting into a bunker, right? That's how we start off, and now we have our first person in the bunker. And it can even be Madeline herself. She was claiming to be a hunter. Maybe we start from her perspective. Something to show us that there are already people working their way towards this location for one reason or another. Maybe people go losing in the woods, they lose somebody they know, and they're looking out to get that person. That's their reason for going out in the woods. It could start from something as small as that, let's say, and then you build from that, as well as other characteristics among these characters. And then you start implementing some of the rules from, and maybe you add a little bit of, the possibility that maybe one among them, daring to pull out the Among Us, the routine of one of the people in the room is not what they seem. And, with that little hint, that little bit of a nudge in the direction, because I think with the movie as small of its cast is, I think this, twist, because it is a twist, I don't think it works that well, because I think it's pretty obvious, unfortunately. If there were a group of four people, and we learned that one among them were an imposter, a fake, a changeling, I think, having a 25% chance of getting it right is a pretty sizable percentile. I think you need a cast of 15 people, and I know that's a large number of characters to write. I know. It probably helped to write some of them as a couple, like couples in a group, instead of singular, just to subdue some of the numbering in that regard. But I think what would help with a bigger cast, even in that size, is having very snappy interactions instead of these very some of these slower moments of the dance number, for example. That could be Chibi wants to dance, and then that's what we learn of her. But then we see someone else being oh no, and then you can couple them in that way. And now we have we begin to almost form these groups, which is a thing that also happens in Among Us, the video game. And I know I'm bringing that up, but it is again sort of this whole. It alludes to sort of this interesting dynamic thing that begins to happen in these archetypal things when you have, and again, a changeling or an imposter among people. How people begin to operate in that way. And, seeing the hinges in the dynamic shift and change from scene to scene, how people take over, I think, one of the very obvious gimmicks you could do, a sheriff. Like, that's a give me. Like, for an example of this, he's like looking for, people like who are lost or whatever. He's like, he or she is like, bound to, help people, feeling very charitable. How do you take that person, learning that there's someone among them that is, a fake, and then see how they respond to such information? How does that change someone who's very devout to trusting people or wanting to help people? You could have the, uh, what would I call it? The obvious, what's the phrase? It's like red herring, yes. Like you can have a red herring, a person who you see, who their initial interactions seem immediately suspect. Like, you would immediately, if there was a group of 15 people, you'd probably, the majority of people the first night would probably point to this person and be like, that guy or girl or whatever, or they are sus, Among Us speak and all that. Things like that, that you can easily just, like, again, and make it very snappy. I think, again, that there are various things you can do. And who does Mina interact with more if we're going to maintain that she is still the main character? Maybe she, like, teams up, as I was suggesting in the beginning, like, with the detective, and they can kind of almost have this almost Sherlock Holmes type of thing going on. And, like, starting to, like, really pin down, like, who these people are. And you have the whole Watcher event happening each night, and we learn more and more. You can have a bunch of different types of things. But I think the way I am describing it, I definitely think that type of work would probably work better as a series rather than a movie, because it probably, again, the pacing of such a thing, of that many characters, would probably have to be, a bit split a bit better rather than, the movie that we have here. Unfortunately, I do, again, still think that this movie's cast is still too small. I probably would push it, if we were to say a maximum, maybe not 15, maybe 8. Maybe 8. But I would probably cap it nowhere under 8. At least with 8, you double the amount of people and reduce the amount of, this person is the changeling, so easy to predict. Which, again, with 4 people, you already have a 25% chance of getting that right. And I feel like that percentile alone is way too massive. And with the just a Latin amount of information Madeline gives, it is like, yeah, I mean, why wouldn't she be the one? It's like, they didn't even attempt a red herring. It's like, what the fuck? But for a debut, I will say, this movie did have its potential. I did see its potential, that being. But I would probably still give this movie like a 5 out of 10. Like, it's decent. There's like a halfway decent movie here in terms of its concept and what it's trying to go for here. And I don't even mind that, the whole ending is a just talk and peaceful ending, as it were. Oh, peaceful to a degree, I suppose, but, I think that ending is fine, and I think you can still pull it off with a larger cast of people. I don't think that has to be lost with a larger number of people. But I don't know. There's definitely something about that. But in terms of what did work, there were definitely setups of like how the forest works and how the watchers work from outside and how they operate, uh, from outside, and the whole being watch perspective is again it draws on that very classic horror trope of you don't really know what's out there for a longer period of time until you do, because this movie reveals what they are by a large extent. Dare I say, perhaps even a bit too much. Maybe even, I think you could probably cut some of those scenes down. The ones where Madeline is describing what these scenes are, what these changelings are. I probably would remove the fairy scene, or condense that scene, the one where she's like describing what they are, the changelings, with them being captured as well. I would condense those two separate scenes because they are two separate scenes, and sort of condense both of those together and see if there were any other scenes that sort of like are like what these creatures are or how their behavior are, and sort of all condense that into one moment and just sort of capsulate it once. Just once, because I think that's really all they needed, and I think they spent a little bit too much time explaining. And again, I think this sort of guilt as far back as, the worst of the night, which would be Avatar, The Last Airbender, the live-action movie. Over-explaining things. And, there's a point in which you have to stop explaining. You have to give your audience enough credit for them to pick up what you're putting down. Like, there was enough imagery even alone here. The parrot, her being a twin sister, and again, I would encapsulate, if you are going to explain everything, again, I would condense all of that into one scene, if you really want to have that, if you really want to explain it, have it all in one moment, and make it short. Because I don't think you need several scenes in explaining what they are. I really don't. You could cut a lot of that out, and, now you have a lot of more free time to, again, do all the things I was talking about. But I digress. So that is my review of The Watchers, and if you ended up enjoying it, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. One, ahead to my petition to help out small YouTubers. Second, to my PayPal, where you can help support me, my channel directly. And third, to my Discord server, where you can join, collab, and chill for free. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.